This lesson will talk about Databricks units, DBUs. DBU. What is a DBU? You're going to see this term all over Databricks. Whenever you work with Databricks, you'll see DBUs. What is DBU? It is short for Databricks units, which is the charging unit of Databricks. Charging unit. What is a charging unit? You know, whenever you have a mobile phone, right? You go to your service provider and say, okay, I wanted to have 500 minutes if you are like talk calls, or if it's data, I need 5 gigabytes, right? And then you consume the data bytes, and your mobile operator say, okay, you consumed 1 gigabyte. The gigabyte will be, you're gonna pay for the gigabyte like $1, right? But you don't think in dollars, you think in gigabytes, because this is what you use. You use gigabytes. If you start thinking of dollars, you'll be confused. You'll say, okay, today I paid $1.5. Okay, how is that in gigabytes? You need to translate, right? Because you work on streaming, you work with movies, it's in gigabyte. You work with files, it's in gigabyte. You work with anything, it's in gigabyte. This is the language that you understand when you work with data, gigabytes. Now, equally, your mobile provider charge you on gigabytes, right? That is the charge unit. It's similar for Databricks, but it's called DBUs, Databricks unit. Databricks unit, it's 1 hour runtime of the cluster. It's per hour. So if you create a cluster with one node, which is the driver and the worker node at the same time, Databricks will tell you, okay, this cluster will charge you 1 DBU per hour. So every time you run this cluster for 1 hour, you're gonna burn 1 DBU, which is understandably. It's like you consume 1 gigabyte of your mobile data if you download this movie. Again, if you process this data, you're gonna burn 1 DBU per hour. But still, you didn't give me the dollars. Where is the dollars? Now you go to Databricks website and see how much is a DBU cost. So you know your cost. We can actually do that. So if we go to Databricks, so see Databricks pricing. You will see how much they publish the DBU. Let's go to Azure pricing. Now, there is a factor here. This DBU depends on what is the type of the cluster that you're using. Remember when we said there is 2 types of cluster? All-purpose and jobs. There is other types, but this is the most common one. But there is server, SQL cluster. There is Delta Life Table, DLT cluster. There is different type of cluster. So depending on which cluster type you create, Databricks will tell you, okay, this is the cost of 1 DBU. This is the multiplier. So you go here. When we create a standard cluster, it's called all-purpose cluster. Now, your workspace we created is a premium workspace, a security feature and stuff. That is 0.5 cent, 55 cents per hour. 55 cents for each DBU. So this cluster here, we run it for 1 hour. Say we run it for 5 hours. And it burned 1 DBU per hour. So times 1. How much is a DBU? Is 0.55. So you can do the math if you wanna calculator. So you multiply 5, multiply the 5s here, 5 times 1 times 0.55. So you're gonna pay $2.75 if you run this for 5 hours. Let's take an exercise. So we're gonna go to Databricks. We're gonna create, there is a cluster here randomly created. So let's put this cluster. If you change the node type, the worker type here, you choose this one. This is a very big cluster. 256 gigabyte of memory, 64 core. That's a big, really big cluster. This cluster will burn 64 DBUs per hour because of photon acceleration. If you remove photon, 32 DBUs per hour. Okay, and this cluster will have, let's add, yeah, 6 nodes or 8 nodes in the cluster. 8 nodes. So this cluster will burn 144 DBUs per hour. So we have this cluster 144 DBUs times 0.55, right? So I think it will come approximately, let's say, $75 per hour. Almost $75 per hour. But bear in mind, bigger cluster mean shorter time to process. So they really gonna pay $7. If your cluster, Databricks, it charges you per second. So it's not gonna be like 1 hour you have to pay 75. If you started this cluster, the one that takes 144, and you run it only for 1 minute, right? So you should pay 75 divided by 60, which is the number of minutes in an hour. So we can actually do that. So if you take 75 here, divided by 60 should be this much. It's not a lot, right? Because every minute your cluster will charge you $1.25 to buy this times 60. So you get $75 in an hour. Databricks, it charges you per second, not per minute, not per hour, like any other vendor, just per second. So you really get exactly what you pay for. So this is pretty much about the DBUs. You don't need to understand. Everything in Databricks is free as a feature. You only pay when you run a cluster. It's not like, okay, there is a new feature from Databricks about, you know, Unity catalog, or about workflows, or about how to run your data in a specific way. It all comes free to you. Maybe it's free in a sense that your subscription allows you to it. Like a premium, you'll get this feature. But you'll not be charged unless you actually run a cluster. So when you run the cluster, then you get it charged. And that's how things work in Databricks. You get it charged when you run the cluster. But the feature itself, Databricks will not ask you to pay to get access to the feature. That's not how it works. This is a consumption kind of business. Consume through the cluster, then you pay through the cluster. And that's pretty much it for the DBUs lesson, and see you in the next lesson.